I really enjoyed listening to Pete and to Steve, and I can identify and relate to a lot of what was shared. And Steve, I've been involved with local government here, and they've tried to do a lot of improvements to have an open air market like Pete's talking about, and grow some of that presence on the waterfront, and had some real struggles developing the infrastructure to do so. So I'd like to talk to you more about how we can actually do that here in Astoria as well. At one time, Astoria, Oregon here was home to about 30 canneries on the waterfront. Primarily, these were salmon canneries. And that's the kind of environment my dad actually grew up in. So he fished when he was growing up, and he built a gillnet boat when he was a sophomore in high school. And this was the primary method of fishing on the Columbia River, which was a drift net, and the fish would go upstream, would actually get tangled in it, and they would harvest that way. And again, this was just a huge economic driver for the entire region. And in fact, Bumblebee Seafoods, Pete will like this, Bumblebee Seafood got started in Astoria. It started as a salmon cannery, and then became a tuna cannery, and then relocated to San Diego about 50 or 40 some years ago. But my dad, he earned a degree in oceanography from Oregon State, a master's degree. He decided to continue fishing. He fished up and down the mainland here, on the entire West Coast from San Diego to Alaska, fishing tuna and salmon. And then he decided he wanted to pursue ground fishing, so bought a trawler. And my brother actually still is a trawler and fishes ground fish, and that's primarily sole and rockfish and cod. But he wanted to kind of vertically integrate so that it wouldn't be just catching fish and delivering to a processor, that we wanted to process the fish himself. And so back in 1978, created a little processing facility. And so he would fish just one day. So it was day fishery only, ice the fish on the boat, would bring it in at night, ice it in the cold room. The filleters would come the next day, fillet the fish. We'd box it up, ice it, and it'd go on a truck usually, and sometimes by air, but on a truck shipper, 150-pound truck shipper down to San Francisco, San Diego, or Los Angeles were the primary markets for us. And that was through the 80s, really what we did. It was a fairly lucrative gig, and that and salmon fishery on the Columbia River was going strong. And so that's what Oregon Ocean Seafoods did, and that became Skipanon Brand Seafoods eventually. But then things really changed in the market in the 90s, and the salmon fishery really dropped off, bottomed out primarily, and the markets in California became more competitive with imported fish and with farm-raised fish. And so we kind of looked to what's the next thing. Let's look at value-added products. You can't compete on volume anymore. What can we do to kind of differentiate ourselves? And so that's where the micro cannery started back in 1995, and a smokehouse, and we built a new kind of processing facility just to do tuna and salmon. We did it, the old-fashioned way before they would double cook tuna. They would actually just back in the Bumblebee days, they would cook the fish on the bone and then kind of tear it all off, peel it all off the carcass, and then pack the cans, and then maybe add a little bit of oil back into the can. And we didn't do that. We actually just it was fresh fish at the time. These were from 3 or 4 boats that we would buy from, and they took immaculate care of the fish. Usually they're day fishing, maybe 2-day fishing, and then we would fillet it. Again, as Molly was mentioning, we had some filleters that had spent decades in the industry and were just artists at being able to fillet fish. And they would pack the cans by hand, and then it would only be cooked once in the retort, and it did make a superior product. I mean, the color was better, the texture was better, and certainly the flavor was better. So that is kind of the origin of the canning business that we ended up doing just in local markets. and then started going to farmers markets. And as Molly was mentioning, the Beaverton farmers market was unique in that it was just food products. It was just groceries. A lot of people came there to shop for groceries. And it was produce primarily, but we were the one fish market that was allowed in at the very beginning. And we stayed there for 23 years selling filleted fish. And so we would fillet it, and I would purchase from my brother. So my brother was ground fishing, and he would, of course, catch, thousands of pounds, but we would take a few hundred of each species and fillet it on our own and package it in oxygen permeable packaging, and then bring it to the market, and just had built up a real loyal clientele. People loved to see us. Pete was mentioning about having family there. Well, that certainly helped. I had my wife, and people got to know us, and they related to you, and you could tell them the story of where the fish come. People wanted to know where it came from, when it was caught, who caught it, is it sustainable, and you were able to answer all of those questions directly being there at the farmers market. So it was a fantastic business that we just continued to build up and grew, kind of expanded our booth over the years, and then expanded our product range too. We didn't we had started just doing salmon and bottom fish, and then ultimately did crab and oysters, shellfish, shrimp, and then lots of smoked fish. And so we had bought a smokehouse as well, and did primarily vacuum packed smoked products. So it was smoked just in a simple brine, brown sugar, salt brine, and then smoked with alderwood, then vacuum packed and frozen. And you needed to freeze it in order to keep it within your HACCP guidelines. And then would bring that to the market, and we sold quite a bit of smoked fish, and then ultimately jerky and other types of products. So that was kind of the development of the farmers market. But we ended up kind of building a retail shop in our own facility, and what we wanted to do was showcase, as was described, showcase the fishermen, showcase the process. So we did a lot of videos of both our filleters filleting. We had some videos from the boat where Jeff, who was one of the tuna fishermen, he was a solo operation, and he'd go out there with a little camera on the GoPro on his dash or on his deck there, and video everything that he was doing while he was catching the fish. This is both tuna and salmon, and people just loved seeing that. And we'd put those on a loop on the TV in our cannery while people came in to buy product. They could look and watch how the fish was being caught, even though not necessarily the fish that you're buying, but it did do the trick, and people enjoyed seeing that. So I really got to give it to Pete being able to band fishermen together, because that's one of the hardest things to do. Fishermen are independent by nature, and they don't necessarily want to get in a cooperative or a collaboration. But that is so very important, especially when you're dealing as a small boat, small producer. You need to have shared services, and that's why I'm kind of excited about things like the Astoria Food Hub, which is just getting off the ground here, and they're still, in the construction phase, and they're still in some of the financing phases. But being able to have a shared facility with cold storage, with a certified kitchen, with retail space, with some distribution advantages, is really the way to go for these smaller operations. And if the landscape here in Oregon is anywhere, like it is on some of the West Coast, I mean, we have big processors that have really sucked up a lot of the smaller processors. So they dominate the landscape. Pacific Seafoods, is a huge operation, multiple facilities, thousands of employees. I believe I know that they have hundreds, if not thousands. And then and then they own their own fleet. So the boats that they buy from are owned by them, and they come and deliver specifically, exclusively to Pacific Seafoods, or one of the larger. So it's harder for a smaller boat or a smaller producer to be able to compete if you don't have that kind of shared services model. And that's why I like to see these co-ops starting in our area, and certainly the food hub starting, because I think that they have some particular advantages. But one of the things that was mentioned, and I think Steve and Pete just had mentioned it several times, the consumer is educated, and they certainly demand, a higher, more information about what their product that they're putting in their mouth is. And they also want to know that they're supporting, whether it's a family business or a business that has shared values, or, a business that's innovative in some way. I mean, that's really drives them nowadays. And it wasn't so decades ago, but I think that's something that can really be, I think, catered to, is just providing as much education information as possible. Trying to think of what other things I noticed that one thing the Food Hub is doing is that they are catering to some kind of unique lending institutions that are more towards share, or they're actually kind of crowdsourcing. So people that have the bent towards investing in our agricultural institutions, or have a bent towards those that have sustainable practices, are more willing to lend to places like the Food Hub, and Food Hub is really taking advantage of that. But also, to Steve's point about the local governments, we have a pretty accommodating local government in Clatsop County and in our areas, but it still takes that leadership from someone that has that vision and proposal to kind of bring people along, and to encourage that infrastructure investment, and to encourage the lending institutions and those to cooperate. So I think that's one thing that you've got to find that person that's going to be that leader, that's going to be able to communicate that vision to your city councils and to your harbors.